want to have sex. It's a normal decision. Well done for making it. And now you're probably wondering, well, what's next? What now? What do I do? Well, guess what? I'm here to tell you what is next. Welcome to lesson 2 of this very strange project I'm doing. I don't know if these are actually going to be at all helpful, but let's do this. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about communication because this is an integral part of having sex, believe it or not. In the last lesson, we talked about what sex might look like and what to potentially expect from it. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about communications because, hear me out. One other thing that I kind of didn't touch on last lesson is that I mentioned that sex is about exploring yourself and your partner and your interests, but sex should also be about comfort. It should be comfortable for all parties. And one thing that's important is to communicate what's comfortable for you. So communication is pretty important then, because you should talk about what's comfortable for you. You should talk about what you like. You should talk about what you don't like, what your boundaries are. And, you should talk about your relationship with this partner so that everybody's on the same page about what to expect. So you should talk about like what you want out of this relationship. Do you want something more open or something more monogamous? Talk about what kind of sex you're into or what you're comfortable with. Basically, you're going to want to talk about a lot of different things with your partner or partners so that everybody is on the same page and knows what they're getting into. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, I know that I should be communicating all this stuff with my partner or partners. I don't know how to do that though. Elena, show me the way. I will try. What we like to talk about at my program here on campus is the importance of I statements. What are I statements, you might ask? I'm so glad you did. I statements are statements where the main focus of said statement is your feelings and emotions. This helps open the floor for conversation and have been found to be less accusatory. Let's say, for example, your partner isn't spending as much time with you as you'd like, and that's kind of hurting you. You'd like to spend more time with them, and you'd like to talk to them so that you can come to a compromise about that. What you should do when it comes to this sort of situation is you should sit down with them and say like, hey, I personally would like to spend more time with you. Is there a way that we can work out a plan so that I can spend more time with you? And then that opens the floor for a more open and honest conversation. It's better to say that than to just be like, why don't you spend enough time with me? Am I boring you? Am I worth it? That's so accusatory. I mean, they do include the word I, but they will start an argument more than anything else. So, yeah. I statements are really good because you communicate directly what you're thinking and what your feelings are so that your partner doesn't have to guess. And, like I said before, they're not as accusatory. It's really important that if you are going to have an open and honest and serious conversation with your partner or partners, it's really important that you have that mindset of, I don't want this to turn into an argument, so I'm gonna do my best to not. Now that we've discussed a technique that you can use for open and honest communication, it's time to talk about a very big aspect of sex and about communication that should happen before sex and during sex. I'm talking about consent. Consent should be the number one thing that you think about before doing any sexual activity. I mean, way before you do anything, you should figure out whether you want to and what you are comfortable with, but before really engaging in sex, think about consent. This is the first thing you do before having any sexy activities. I'm going to be putting a lot of emphasis on it because consent is important. If you do not obtain consent, or your partner actively denies consent and you still have a sexual encounter with them, that could be a crime. That's a crime. That is sexual assault. So it's really important that everybody is on the same page as to what consent is, what consent isn't, and what it could look like. Consent has kind of been brought into the spotlight due to stories that have been coming out about like sexual harassment and sexual assault, centered around this idea that no means no. And while no means no isn't a bad idea when it comes to consent, it kind of opens the door for some problems. Everybody has a fight or flight response, but they also have a third option, which is freeze. Sometimes when people are encountering an uncomfortable or a scary situation, they can freeze up as a response. So they freeze up and basically they can't say no. And because they can't say no, some people think that is consent. Some people think that just because they didn't say no, like, they must be okay with what's about to happen. That's not always the case, though. Because of this, I am going to push this idea of, instead of no means no, let's focus on only yes means yes. This helps that only yes means yes. Basically, the only time you have consent is when somebody is actively saying yes to what's happening. The absence of a no is not a yes. Saying I don't know isn't a yes. And anything that isn't a clear yes is not consent. I don't want to hear any, oh, but if I ask for consent, it's going to break the mood that we've spent so long building up. Well, you don't want that. I don't want to hear any, oh, but asking for consent will feel so formal and will break this mood. If y'all can't figure out how to ask for consent in a way that doesn't break the mood, y'all need to get creative, I'm telling you. I keep saying y'all as if I'm Southern. I'm not Southern at all, I'm from the Midwest. You can ask for something, asking for consent can be easy, and it can be something simple. It can just be something as simple as, are you okay with this? Can I keep going? Do you want to stop? Like, these are all valid ways of asking for consent. Basically, you need to make sure that whoever you are having sex with is on board with having sex with you. I'm trying to make this as clear as possible, and I'm also trying to make sure I don't repeat myself, because I have a habit of that. While it's important to recognize what consent isn't, it's also important to recognize what consent does look like. Consent doesn't look like somebody freezing up, somebody saying, I don't know, somebody saying no. That's not what consent looks like. Consent, and it's important to sort of touch on all of those, but it's also equally as important to talk about what consent does look like. So we're going to be going over that now. Consent is revocable. This means that at any point in time, any party can basically change their mind. They can say, you know what, I'm not as into this as I thought I would be. Or like, you know what, I've got a lot on my mind. Or they can just be like, you know what, I don't want to do this right now. So all parties can say, I've changed my mind, I don't want to do this anymore. Consent is also sober. Basically, consent is also sober. It's very important that people are making decisions about their body while they are clear-headed and not in a state of inebriation. Getting drunk or high can really mess with your head and like mess with what you want or what's good for you. So it's important that you obtain a sober yes, because if any party is not sober and they're giving consent and like sexual activities happen, depending on your state, that's illegal. Look up your state laws. I know where I live, it's illegal to give consent if you're intoxicated in any way. So it's really important that you guys are law-abiding citizens for this law. this law is important. Consent is clear. This means that all parties know exactly what is about to happen. Like I mentioned in the last session, sex can look differently for different people, and sex can mean different things for different people. If somebody asks you if you want to have sex, in your mind you might be thinking they mean penetrative sex, but in their mind they might mean oral sex. It's important to have these conversations so everybody's on the same page, basically, and so everybody's clear as to what's about to happen. Consent is enthusiastic. Basically means that all parties are like, yes, I know what's going to happen, and I am excited to be a part of it. Consent is also reciprocal. This means that all parties have basically mutual feelings, that they're all excited about what's going to happen. This isn't a one-sided thing. Consent and sex is a two-way street, baby. Consent is also freely given. This means that consent was obtained under somebody's free will. It wasn't obtained through manipulation, it wasn't obtained through coercion, it wasn't obtained through blackmail, it wasn't obtained through blocking off the entrance. Consent was given completely by this person's free will. To touch on that too, consent also implies that no is an option. When you are asking for consent, you should know that the person saying no is absolutely an option. And so if you're asking for consent from somebody, this means that you're not only taking yes for an answer. This also goes under consent is freely given. Last but not least, consent is active. This means that you are actively checking in with your partner or partners while the deed is being done. This can look like, I probably mentioned these examples earlier. This can look like, hey, does this feel good? Hey, can I try this? Hey, are you doing okay? They don't have to start with, hey, I'm just a really casual person. Basically, you check in on them every once in a while. And again, don't worry about it breaking the mood. You can ask for consent, and you can ask, you can check in on your partner in really sexy and confident ways. You gotta believe in yourself, and you gotta think outside the box, or just go with something as simple as, can we keep going? It's classic. Oh, so all of that is what consent is. Let's talk just a little bit longer about what consent doesn't look like. Consent isn't automatic. This means that you don't automatically have consent from somebody. It doesn't matter if that somebody's your husband or wife or your friends with benefits buddy that you have sex with every 2 weeks. It doesn't matter what your relationship is to that person. You ask for consent and you do it every time you are going to have sex. It's never automatic. You should never just automatically assume that you have it. You need to ask. Consent is also not only up for one person to decide. Like I mentioned before, sex and consent is a two-way street. It shouldn't be one person asking it every time. It should be up to all the parties to make sure everybody is consenting and make sure everybody's okay with what's going to happen. It's a two-way street, basically. Consent can also go beyond sexual relationships. If you start exercising consent more outside of sexual scenarios, you'll find that it actually gets a little easier to ask for consent in sexualized scenarios. You can ask your best friend, I had a really hard day. Can I rant to you? You could be out to lunch with your partner and realize, hey, your food looks really good. Can I have some? Ooh, excuse me, that was a burp. The more comfortable you get with asking for consent in everyday activities, the more you'll find that it's easier to ask for consent in sexualized scenarios. This absolutely can go for physical and romantic gestures too. Absolutely ask your partner if you can kiss them. Absolutely ask your partner if you can hug them. Absolutely do that stuff. I touched on this a little bit before, but I mentioned that consent implies that no is an option. Consent is also revocable, meaning everybody has the right to change their mind. and everybody has the right to say no. So now let me just touch on how to take that no, because it can be a little surprising to hear at first. It's very important for you to know how to react. When you hear a no, it's important that you don't get upset, because this could discourage your partner from coming to you about boundaries again. So it's important that you don't get upset, and it's important to just make sure that you have a general understanding of what to do now. And so when somebody says no to you, when it comes to especially sexual scenarios, what you should do instead of getting upset is you should sort of like take a step back and be like, okay, and you want to reestablish boundaries. You want to say, okay, you don't want to have sex. Are you okay with like making out, or would you rather just do something else entirely, like watch a movie? So after you sort of talked about that, you reestablish their boundaries and you talk about like what would they like to do now, and you figure out what you'd like to do now, and you make sure that everybody's on the same page. After all that, you should thank your partner for being so open and honest with you, because like I mentioned earlier, being open and honest with people can be hard and it can be scary, especially if you don't know how that person is going to react. So if you react in a positive way, this will encourage your partner to come to you again when it comes to boundary issues. It's really important to be a good partner. The only thing I really have to talk about now when it comes to communication and consent is, it's important to talk about your STI status so that your partner and partners know how to properly protect themselves. Especially when it comes to your HIV status, because in some states, it's illegal to withhold that information from a sexual partner. According to the STD Check, which is a blog, this was written in 2015. I'm going to put a link in the description. More than 24 states in the US have laws enforcing the disclosure of a known positive HIV status to all sexual partners. So if you withhold that information from your sexual partners, it's a crime in some states and you could be punished for it. So talk about STI status and talk about birth control options, or talk about if you're on any form of birth control. Talk about who's going to be bringing the condoms. Boy howdy, I can't wait for that lesson. I hope YouTube will let me just bring a dildo on camera. That if they do, that'll be great. So yeah, that was basically my little lesson about communication. I hope I hit all the I think I hit most of the points. If I left anything out, I'm very sorry. I don't think I did though. If I did leave anything out, leave a comment in the comment section below. Because, you know, this conversation can definitely include more input, and it's an important conversation to have. So to sort of wrap up this lesson, let's see. Talk about what you want from a relationship and what you want to do with your partners. Use I statements. Consent is really important. It's important that you get an enthusiastic yes out of somebody. Only yes means yes. Talk about STI status and what birth control you're on, if you're on any, to your partner. And if your partner is telling you no, or if you're telling no to your partner, make sure that you react in a positive way. Or just make sure that you reestablish boundaries and make sure you know what your partner is okay with. I think that's basically it. I think that's all we talked about today. Alright, well, I'll see y'all in the next lesson, where we're probably going to be talking about STIs and pregnancy. I only say probably because I don't have my lesson plan up right now, so I can't tell you for sure. Bye!